good. I'm loving living. It's all good. Loving living. It's all good. I'm loving living. It's all good.
All right, it's another edition of It's All Good. It's Lucas with Dr. Eric. So this week I'm in Tucson with you, Dr. Eric. Thank you for inviting me to your house. And why am I here?
You're in my studio. So if you look around my studio, you can sort of see some of the things we talk about every day.
Yeah.
What catches your eye in the studio? This is my office. It's not really a studio. I have a microphone attached to my desk.
Yeah, but you have turned your office into a studio, and it also looks like everywhere I look on every single wall that you have some kind of a saying on the wall that you look at. Even your clock doesn't even have hands on it.
What time is it? What time does my clock say?
It says now. Right where the hand should be on a clock, it says now.
That's all we have is now.
Yeah. I mean, it's really incredible that you have all these things and how long is it taking to collect all this stuff?
It's a never ending. I take stuff down, put stuff up. So it's constantly, whatever my focus is, it's hard to focus on this many things. So there's times that I put something new up there that I really need to focus on more. I
see there's spiritual stuff over here. There's inspirational things that you see. There's a bunch of family things that you see. There's a lot of good stuff in here. So I'm actually at Eric's house, and I flew down here because we got to finish the book that I started writing about 2 years ago. So the first thing we want to talk about in our segment of It's All Good is what if somebody gives you an idea or somebody asks you or suggests something to you. A lot of times when people suggest things to me, I let it go in one ear and out the other. It's like, okay, yeah, right. Well, 2 years ago, I got interviewed by a syndicated morning show, and they wanted to ask me all kinds of questions about what happened to me in Sacramento, California, when I did a morning show in Sacramento, California. And it was a 10-year anniversary of what happened. And, if you don't know the story, I worked on a morning show where our radio station did a contest called Hold Your Wee for a Wee, where contestants were drinking water, and the last person drinking water that didn't quit the competition won the wee. And a woman that got second place ended up going home that afternoon and died. And so everybody got fired. My life turned upside down. I went into a depression. And anyways, I write about that whole segment in my book, My Crazy Radio Life, which will be coming out soon. But once I did that interview with this syndicated morning show, I sent a copy of that interview to Eric. And you called me the next day. You were on the road driving somewhere with I think your son Marcus was in the car. And you called me, and what did you say to me after you heard that interview?
I was driving with Dallin and Annika, I think, to San Diego.
Your kids, right.
And we were going for a weekend, and we were listening to it, and I said, it just hit me really hard you need to write a book. I've seen what you've gone through, and then my brain said, this is not only a book, this is people all over the world can learn incredible lessons from your life, the lessons that you've learned, and also sort of understand maybe in their own lives the difficulties they have and that there's hope at the end of the tunnel. So I just saw instantly, I got so excited. I think I called you and we talked, and I was just, I just think we learn from the examples of others. Wisdom is applied knowledge, and Benjamin Franklin used to say, experience keeps a dear school, but fools will learn in none other. So do we want to experience the trial somebody else did and learn the lesson the hard way, or do we try to learn the lessons of life when somebody's gone through those? And I think that when you have something like you've gone through that's been incredibly difficult and you've been able to overcome, it's a great analogy for people in life to gain confidence. I just thought it was a great way to inspire and uplift other people because you've lived it, and a lot of people don't have to live it, and there's a lot of people that could have hope by reading your story.
Okay, so when you told me that, at first, the first thing that went through my mind was like, yeah, right. I've only read like 6 books in my whole life. There's no way I'm going to sit down and write a book. I don't even know how to do that. And then I went home and I did that exercise that you taught me a long time ago, which was go home and try to meditate, turn everything off, and let your brain just take over. And then just listen to your thoughts. And so I did that, and the thought kept coming back. The things that you said is like, you have to write a book to help people because there's so many people that go through worse things than you went through. And I said, oh my gosh, how am I going to write a book? So the thing you told me that, and I was like, okay, well, I'm going to commit to writing this book. And it took me a long time to write this book. I mean, there's a lot of ideas that just popped into my head of what I wanted to say and how I wanted to say it. And then reliving some of those things that happened to me were very difficult to write about. But I figured, you know what, I'm going to do it. So I think in this part of the podcast, where when somebody gives you an idea or a suggestion, think about it before you say no. And so I think that's one positive thing is like, sometimes I used to be the part where I just like, I'm not going to listen to this. I'm not even going to, I'm never going to write a book. I've only read 7 or 8 books in my whole life. So then I actually ponder it. I said, okay, well, let me do this. So one thing is when somebody gives you a suggestion, think about it before you say no. The other thing is, I was talking about parts of this book that I've written about my life. And I remember the day where I called you, Eric, the day I found out that the girl in the contest had died. And you were just talking about this a couple of minutes ago when we were outside, that I was, and I don't remember a lot of the phone call because I think I was still in shock. So, but I think I went to the lowest of lows of my life, and I didn't know what to do. And at that point, I mean, what did you see or what did you think that was going to happen to me?
Couple points of what you said. I'm going to get to when you called me. I do think there's a couple things about inspiration. Remember when we talked about the book early on, I offered, because I've written a book and I've done things, and I said, hey, I'm going to get in here and I'm going to write this with you.
Yeah.
And for about a year, and this is what happens when we get ideas sometimes. It's easy to say, hey, so-and-so, I could use some help, and then we try to defer some of that responsibility. I couldn't write it. I wrote a lot of things, but it wasn't my story.
Yeah.
It wasn't my experiences other from the outside in. And about a year into it, I think we both saw that, and you finally took ownership of the idea and just went after it. And that's when the expression, and when I started to first read your writings, my writings were, they were boring and they were factual, but your writings had heart, and that's when it really changed the direction of the project. So that's the first thing. When people get an idea, sometimes we want to say, hey, I want to get somebody to help me do this. Mm-hmm. But there's certain things in life you have to do yourself, because the genius and the reason you got the idea is because you have that. But I remember the Friday, it was a Friday afternoon. You were supposed to come down that weekend. I think it was Martin Luther King weekend.
Yeah.
And I don't know what was going to happen. We were going to do something, but then
we were going to go golf with your family. It was a golf tournament.
And then you had a concert or something, and then this contest.
Yeah, there's a lot of stuff going on in Sacramento. They didn't let me go on the trip to come to Tucson.
So I just remember getting a call early afternoon. I think it was a Friday. I'm almost positive it was a Friday. And, I picked up the phone, and it was sort of silent. And the only words you said is she's dead. And, you were, emotionally a wreck. And so my mind thought, Nicole, what's wrong with Nicole or your mom? I'm just thinking of who it is. And over the course of that next 10 or 15 minutes, it literally took that long. I think your brain was struggling to process the fact that somebody you cared and loved about a listener in an innocent show, and you'd done so many contests and things so many times, never, ever contemplating anything like this. And the last thing in your mind, I don't think at that time you were thinking about anything. You didn't mention anything about the future. You mentioned about this lady has children.
Yeah.
And it was just devastating. And from that point on, obviously a lot of things occurred. But your story in the book is interesting because that's only part of the story. I think a lot of people don't realize, as I didn't realize before I knew you, the drive and determination of going from where you were in life to becoming the number one guy in the country in the number one station in an overnight in a matter of a short time, because you listened to those dreams and you sat and you thought. People get dreams and they just push them aside instead of thinking, this is me, and rehearsing it. And then, your story just going from one end of the country to the other end of the country, and all of the experience, it's a ride that is, it doesn't matter who you are, it's going to be incredibly entertaining. That's why I think movie, I just can't imagine all of the experiences you've dealt with. There's been some bad stuff, but there's been a lot of funny and great experiences that everybody can relate to.
Me and Marcus, your son, were talking about it because he's helping me with the book, and we were talking about, in Forrest Gump, there's so many different weird scenes in Forrest Gump that it just all came together. And it's kind of like my life, like the craziest things that happened to me in radio and just in life, just bizarre things that we're just making the comparison of how crazy that would be. And hopefully one day, it can be a movie, because I think, people can learn from it for sure. Okay, so with that experience, I went from making the most money I've ever made in my whole life to making zero money. And I just bought a house for the first time. It was my very first house that I bought. And then we had to foreclose on the house. I had to sell my wife's wedding ring. We had to get rid of all of our furniture. At some point, we were living in a house with no furniture before we were kicked out. We went to it was a place of like things that you see in a movie, but it was actually happening in real life. And so I know there's people that are listening that have done that. They've had great jobs, and then they went from that to, for some reason, not being able to be hired and not having money. How would you, what mindset? Because it took me a long time to figure this thing out. What suggestions would you give to people who have to go through something like that?
The biggest thing people get when they get in those positions is they just see the avalanche. They're just not able to look around and see the true blessings in life. And you were at that point to where we get so caught up in sometimes our image and our profession and our houses and our cars and everything that we forget the most important things in life are none of those things. And I remember distinctively you were living in Arizona and your wife and Zach were in Sacramento because she's keeping the job there she has.
Yeah.
While you're trying to drum up work here, and you were miserable. And I think you realized at that time, it didn't matter if I had nothing, I just need my wife and my son.
Yeah.
And that's the most important. And a lot of times people have to do that. They almost have to get very real with themselves. And most of the time, our brain has a way of making things way worse than they are, even when they're really bad already. You have to make a list and you have to make an inventory, and you have to be very honest and assess the situation. And most of the time, we realize, hey, my wife's healthier, my husband's healthier, my kids are healthy. That's a blessing many people in the world don't have, that have all the money in the world, and we start to realize, hey, I've got that, and I can always start over. I can always build. So you have to get really real with the situation. Don't over-evaluate it and play that game where the brain will go into catastrophe mode. The brain has a way of, we start to think one thing, and 20 minutes later, our life is so bad 10 years down the road, and we haven't lived but 20 minutes. And so you just have to bring it back and take a mental inventory and be honest and say, this is where I'm at. What can I do? And not worry about what ifs.
Here's what I did. I mean, you've told me about this and about focusing on something. And you've told me, you've helped me come up with a dream board. And I remember drawing my very first dream board. And so I did a dream board, and I put my dream board in my bathroom on the window, on the mirror at my mom and dad's house where I was living at the time. And every single day I walked in there and I saw what was on my dream board. And of course, it was a picture of my family, a picture of a house, because my wife said she would not move back to Arizona unless I got us a house. I had 3 small part-time jobs that I was working at the time. And I had different things on my board that I wanted to accomplish. And I think when you see it every single day, there's something that you do when you see something. I think you helping me come up with a dream board helped me get a house, get my family back to move in with me and be with my family. And so what is it about a dream board or about visualizing or seeing something that helps you achieve the things that you set out to achieve?
My favorite book, maybe my favorite book of all time, but it's definitely in the top 5, is The 7 Habits of Highly Effective People by Stephen Covey. And when you look at the 7 habits, Stephen Covey starts out with the basic habit number 1. You've got to be proactive. You've got to realize that it begins and ends with you. You have the ability to change. You have the ability to make choices. But the habit right behind it, number 2, is to begin with the end in mind. And we forget that a lot. You think about, I'm building a house now. And we build a house, and we have to literally measure and have the architect have structural engineers come in. We have to do all of these things before we ever move 1 ounce of dirt, because if we don't, there's going to be incredible change orders, or the house is going to fall, or it's going to have major problems. And yet in our lives, most people don't begin with the end in mind. They don't even know what they want. They get up every morning because they got up yesterday every morning. They get in the car because they got in the car. And they do that over and over and over. So I think the key is you've got to have a direction. Zig Ziglar years ago used to talk about a great archer. And he talked about this guy had won 20 competitions, over 20 years had never lost. Howard Hill was the guy's name. And Zig said in his seminar, he said, in 5 minutes, I could have all of you in this room hitting the target better than Howard Hill did on his best day. And Zig then went on to say, if I blindfolded Howard Hill, spun him in a circle 20 times, and then let him shoot. And the people in the audience said, well, that's foolish. How can you hit a target you can't see? And Zig paused, and then he says, that's a great question, but how can you hit a target that you don't have? Many people don't have a target, and they get frustrated because they don't hit things they see on TV. They don't even know what they want. So having the dream board, or knowing what you want first, and then evaluating, I say contrasting where you are and where that dream board is, and then making a plan. It's insanity, and that's why people are depressed and upset, to think they're going to get something without even having that target out there to hit.
So I think the moral of this podcast today would be come up with it, figure out what you want in life, what should be on your dream board, and then how do you achieve it, and make sure you see it every day, and then check things off that you do every day to achieve the things to hit your dream board. Because Eric's right. When you wake up, I know thousands of people that just get up every day, go to work, come home, sit on the couch, watch TV, and go to bed, and repeat it every day, and they claim that they're miserable. There is a way to change all that, but you have to put the work in. And that's a few things that I've learned from Eric, being my life coach, helping me focus on things that, I would never have written a book if I didn't focus on things that were important to me. And so I think the change, maybe this is a podcast for maybe some change going on this week. Anything else, Eric?
And I think, too, that when we embark upon the change, and once people get excited, because we've all gone to seminars, and seminars are great because our endorphins, they can take your blood. They've done tests where they'll take your blood when you enter a seminar, a positive seminar, and they'll take your blood 2 or 3 hours later. It's incredible, the endorphins. So we know it does help. But we also know it's temporary. So people go to the seminar excited to change the world, excited to change their life, and then Monday morning, life hits them in the face again. And by Wednesday or Thursday, they're frustrated because they are not dreaming as big, and they don't have 42 people cheering them on, or Tony Robbins music in the background keeping them motivated. And so they just push it away again. You've got to keep that dream alive, and you've got to visit it every day. And then you've got to realize you're going to make mistakes, or we call them mistakes. And you've got to get excited, because mistakes means, hey, I did it wrong, so I learned a way not to do it. I think Edison said, when somebody said, it's taken you this many times to invent the light bulb, I think 2,000 times. And he said, or they said, you failed 2,000 times. He said, no, I just learned how not to make a light bulb 2,000 times. And we've got to take that attitude of, I just learned a way that didn't work, so now that's great. That's behind me. I can do something else. But it's hard to stay motivated if you don't have that target that excites you. If this book didn't excite you, you would have stopped doing it a week or two. So if the goal doesn't excite you, it's somebody else's goal. It's got to be what you want, and that's why you have to listen to your inspiration. Sometimes our parents, meaning well, push us in a path, an education that we don't want. And it doesn't matter how much they push us and how great the salary is 3 or 4 years into it. These people say, this sucks, I hate this, because it's not what they want. So we've got to listen to that inner voice and then revisit it daily to keep the excitement, because passion is the fuel that lets you do the work to get it done. And the only way you have the passion is if it excites you. So passion is fuel. If you don't have passion for your goal, you're not going to keep doing it within a few weeks because it's not your goal and you didn't have enough passion.
All right, that is your challenge. Thanks for listening to It's All Good. We'll see you next time.
It's all good. I'm loving living. It's all good.